I'm Barry Nussbaum. Welcome to ATP Report. Today I'm thrilled to have as our special interviewee and guest the National Director of ATP, the founder of Live Up to Freedom, the producer of the Glazov Gang, and quite famous Iranian-American human rights activist, Aynaz Cyrus. Welcome aboard, Aynaz.
It's a pleasure to be here, Barry. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's such a thrill. Today we're going to talk about what is the main topic in America today as it relates to what is going on in the world regarding terrorism, which is Sharia. And Sharia laws entree into our American policy, our American society, and sadly into the pervasive spread of violence within the American homeland. What I would like to do with you today is follow up on an article you wrote for ATP, which is What is Sharia, and get into specifics of what actually it would mean. There's so much hyperbole that America as a progressive country is accepting of all religious beliefs, all religious tolerance, and wants to integrate everybody's personal beliefs into the American way of life. But I think as we're going to discover today, Aynaz, when somebody says, oh, Sharia is just someone's interpretation of Islam and is compatible with everything in America, that ain't true, is it?
Absolutely no way. Not possible.
Well, let's get into specifics. I would really love if this could be an educational experience for our viewers. I was shocked as I learned from my studies that the traditional ways of life within America are all actually covered under Sharia and have some really onerous consequences in many cases. Let's start with women's rights. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on how Sharia looks at a woman versus looks at a man?
Oh, absolutely. Well, if I give you a short answer, is basically under Sharia, there is no such a thing as women's right. Women have no rights, none whatsoever. Or at least in a way, the way we are familiar with rights here in America under our Constitution. In Sharia and also in Islam, a woman is counted as half of a man. And for any of the audience and the viewers who would like to see actual evidence, they can go to Quran.com, pull up the 4th verse of the Quran called An-Nisa, the woman, look up the 11th verse, and they will see where on that specific verse, it has been mentioned that a girl in a family will receive half of anything a man or a boy in the family would receive. And from there to the hadith, to the sunnah, to the entire Islamic countries, a woman is always counted as a half of a man. When it comes to having properties, when it comes to having rights, even when it comes to having actual rights to testify. A testimony of a woman is counted as a half of a testimony of a man, meaning one man can testify, and in order to override that testimony, you need 2 women to testify.
Okay, so contractually there are differences, in other words, under contract law, and in terms of legal testimony, but before we get into specifics, and I've got a whole list to cover with you today, explain this to me. If you were, let's say, a woman within the United States, an American citizen, and you decided that you were on board with your family following Sharia, what would your obligation as a Muslim to be? Would it to be following the American Constitution, the rights guaranteed under the Bill of Rights, and the individual laws of the states and the federal government? Or would you be obligated through your religion to say, well, all that's well and good, but my primary obligation is to God, and the way I show that is by putting Sharia above the local law? Which governs if you are observant?
Oh, you absolutely will have to obey Sharia and put Sharia and Islamic laws above the law of the land. not only it's your obligation to follow Sharia above every other law, it's also part of your obligation to make sure to override those laws, meaning the Constitution, any state laws, any federal laws. It is your obligation to override them as much as you possibly can.
So in terms of how that would apply to someone's life, when you have the vast majority and 99% of the population that believes that the law of the land is codified in the state legislatures and the federal laws, all governed by the U.S. Constitution and the state constitutions. And yet, as an observant Muslim in our example, you know that that's not true. What would happen in society if, say, we had 5% of the population absolutely not recognizing any laws of the land if there was a conflict with Sharia?
Well, simply we would have 5% of our society who would completely not only disobey, but they would break the law. The reason I say they would break the law is that 90% of Sharia is actually against our Constitution. So by following Sharia, they will have no choice but to break the law in reality. So you're facing with people who are willing to break the law in order to follow their own laws and rules to be a devoted Muslim in America.
Well, let's talk about specifics, because as I've done my research as an American who was born and raised here, it's almost comical in its extremism, and yet it seems to be the truth. For example, if you're a Muslim and you have questions about Muhammad in regards to his writings, or about Allah and what your relationship should be to God, and you question or criticize, what can happen to you under Sharia?
Well, if you criticize Allah, Muhammad, or verses of Quran, the only thing that will happen to you is you will be punished by death. Now, what format of death depends on the imam of your local mosque, but you're definitely going to die. However, if you have questions, you're allowed to go to your imam and ask questions and ask them to answer your questions. But by end of that question and answer session, if you still doubt what the imam told you and explained, then you could again be either punished by exile or death, again, depending on the decision made by the imam of your local mosque.
Holy moly. Literally put to death.
Put to death. If you're lucky, they hang you. If you're not so lucky, they stone you.
Wow. What about committing crimes like theft? You walk into a store and you shoplift. What's the crime for theft?
Well, that one, absolutely no debate about it. Within Quran, Allah has ordered Muslims to, if it's your first time shoplifting or committing the theft, they will be cutting your left arm and right leg, or vice versa, the opposite sides. If it is your second time, they will cut the remaining, whichever side is remain. If it's your third time, then you're punished by death. You always are punished by death.
When you say cut, do you mean cut off?
Yes, completely. Cut it off from shoulder if it's the arm, from shoulder if it's the leg, from exactly where your leg starts. At the very top, cut it off.
I mean, do people actually live after this amputation?
Well, actually, yes. Amazingly, yes. There has been over 10 reported cases in Saudi Arabia in 2016 who survived, and 3 cases in Islamic Republic of Iran who survived in 2016.
Okay. It sounds beyond horrific to me as an American. What's the punishment for a wife that disobeys her husband?
Well, if you disobey your husband as a Muslim wife, he is allowed to warn you first. If you don't go back to obeying, he can separate his bed from you, which means also he can stop paying for your food, your clothes, your housing, all of that. And if you continue disobeying, he can beat you until you obey. And if you're stubborn enough not to obey, then he can behead you and get rid of you, basically. Like chop your head off.
Here we go again with another death sentence.
I told you, it always ends up there. You will die one way or another. There's always a death for you within Islam.
So if I've read about honor killings that are now spread to the United States. Numerous cases have been reported, for example, out of Michigan, where there's a very significant Muslim population of immigrants from the Middle East. If a daughter, a teenage girl, goes out and let's say she's 19 years old and she goes to a dance and finds a boyfriend and hangs out with him, what can happen to her?
Well, the very first question is, it depends. Is the guy a Muslim or the guy a non-Muslim? If the guy is a non-Muslim, then the family of the girl, meaning brother or father or both, have the right to kill her in the name of honor killing, because dating a non-Muslim or marrying a non-Muslim is forbidden in Islam for a woman. This is very important. Not for a man, for a woman. So if you're dating a non-Muslim, they can kill you because you brought shame into the family as a Muslim girl. If you go and date a Muslim man, if they can convince the man to marry you, you're good to go. If not, they can again kill you in name of honor killing because you committed what's known as adultery.
Unbelievable. Everything ends at death, like you said. We're out of time for this segment, Aynaz. I want to thank you very much. I hope that everybody that watches this spreads this news to every other American that cares about our freedoms and doesn't want to see this happen to anybody they care about. We're going to do more of these segments, I promise you. Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Before we go, I want to tell all of our audience, make sure to actually sign up and subscribe to ATP Report, because as Barry said, we are going to teach you a lot of details about Sharia that you definitely need to know in order to protect your freedom and the future of your children. Thank you, Barry, for having me on.
Come back for part 2. We're going to ask Aynaz some very specific questions about Sharia law and what the punishments are if you don't follow the rules. You will not want to miss that.